Ben hated the mornings most of all. They came too quickly, too loud, and with too many demands. "Get up, Ben, sun's not waiting for you." He groaned and rolled over in the makeshift cot, pulling the threadbare blanket over his head. The sharp clang of a bucket being dropped near his feet made him jolt upright. "I'm awake," he barked, blinking in the pale morning light that streamed through the cracks in the old barn's roof. His father stood over him, arms crossed, his expression half amused, half impatient. "You can sleep when you're dead, boy. We've got fences to fix and traps to check before the heat sets in. Or would you rather let the deer and scavengers eat us out of a house and home?" Ben swung his legs over the edge of the cot, muttering, "Would it kill you just to let me sleep in just once?" "Probably," his father replied, tossing him a dented water flask. "Now get moving." The barn was a patchwork of rusted metal and scavenged wood, built generations ago when the first settlers came to the outskirts of Emirates. It was home, or close enough to the idea of one. Ben stretched, wincing as his back cracked, then pulled on his boots. The cool air was thick in the smell of hay, damp earth, and the faint tang of something metallic, a constant reminder of the broken world they lived in. Outside, the morning spread like a gray bruise. Outside, the morning spread like a gray bruise on the horizon. The settlement was quiet, save for the sounds of chickens scratching in the dirt and the low murmur of voices from a nearby house. Their patch of land sat on the edge of what used to be a thriving suburb, though you'd never guess it now. The fields were overgrown, and the asphalt roads were cracked and half swallowed by weeds. Every so often, they'd find remnants of the old world. A broken vending machine, a rusted bicycle, or a billboard faded beyond recognition. Ben had grown up hearing stories about what life used to be like before everything fell apart, but he'd stopped believing in those fairy tales years ago. Corin was already outside hauling planks of wood towards the fence. He didn't look up as Ben approached, but his tone was sharp. "Took you long enough." "Good morning to you too," Ben said, grabbing a hammer from the tool pile. Corin was only 4 years older, but he carried himself like he had the weight of the entire settlement on his shoulders. His hair was cropped short, his face tanned and lined from too much sun, and his hands were calloused from years of work. Next to him, Ben always felt smaller, softer, like he hadn't quite grown into himself yet. They worked in silence for a while, replacing the rotted sections of the wooden fence that circled their property. Every so often, Ben would glance towards the horizon, where the ruins of Emirates loomed like jagged teeth. He'd never been allowed to go beyond the outer fields, but he couldn't stop himself from wondering what was out there. "Quit staring off like a lost pup," Corin said without looking up. "You know what Dad says about daydreaming." "I'm not daydreaming," Ben muttered, driving a nail into the wood with more force than necessary. "You always are. That's why you're useless when it comes to real work." Ben bit back a retort. He'd learned long ago that arguing with Corin was about as useful as trying to stop a storm with a bucket. By midday, the heat was oppressive, and Ben's shirt stuck to his back. They ate a quick lunch of dried meat and stale bread under the shade of an old oak tree, the only thing still standing in what used to be the town square. "Do you think it was better before?" Ben asked, breaking the silence. Corin looked up from his water flask, his brows furrowed. "Before what?" "Before all of this," Ben gestured to the fields, the ruins, the cracked roads stretching into nothing, the schism, the war, everything. Corin shrugged. "Doesn't matter. This is the world we've got now. Wishing for something else won't change it." Ben frowned, staring at the horizon again. He didn't expect Corin to understand. Corin was the type who could spend his whole life fixing fences and hauling water and call it a good day's work. Ben wanted more. He didn't know what more looked like, but he felt it, like a restless itch he couldn't scratch. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of red and gold, Ben climbed to the roof of the barn and sat with his knees pulled up to his chest. From here he could see the faint glows of the city ruins in the distance, like embers in a dying fire. He imagined what it must have been like before the world broke apart. Streets full of people, buildings that touched the sky. A time when humanity wasn't just surviving, but thriving. Below him, the voices of his father and Corin carried through the night, muffled by the barn walls. They were talking about supplies, repairs, the things that always seemed to matter most. Ben didn't blame them for it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more waiting for him, just out of reach. Something bigger than fences and fields and rotting planks of wood. As the first stars appeared, he let his gaze linger on the city ruins one last time before climbing down. One day, he promised himself. One day, he found out what was out there.